I'm Simona Costantini, founder of Volt Productions, and you need to listen to today's episode because we are sharing all of the secrets about podcasting and AI, and you don't want to miss it.
The Tech Your Business podcast has been one of the hardest things I've had to do as an introvert because I always tell people that before 2022, I never had any video of myself online. And all of a sudden, I have to have a video of myself every week online. So it's actually really weird. But on the other side, it's been amazing too because it's allowed me to connect with a lot of amazing people from all around the world, including today's guest, who coincidentally starts podcasts for businesses. This is the Tech Your Business podcast where we break down technology, inform you about the latest in technology so you can earn more, do more, and learn more about technology for your business. So my name is Peter, and if you're interested in starting a podcast for your business, or maybe you already started a podcast and maybe you're struggling with it, today's episode is for you. And today we'll be talking with Simona Costantini from Volt Production. So welcome to the show, Simona.
Hi, Peter. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on here with you today.
Thank you. So can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got into podcasting?
Absolutely. So I've been in the industry since about 2018, and I got into podcasting from a really hard moment in my life that I wanted to get through. And I was trying to figure out, how do I take everything that I've learned about myself, about the world, about emotions, and all of the above? How do I take all of that? And how do I help other people feel less alone? And the first thing that came to mind for me was podcasting, which is really interesting because I didn't have a podcast at the time. I didn't have a following of any kind at the time. I didn't do anything on social media. None of that was my priority. Like I very much did not. I was not someone who was online a lot. And as the time went on, I kept podcasting and I kept learning and I kept growing. And then people actually started listening, and I got really excited about it because I was like, wow, like this is really cool. You share one idea with someone and people resonate with that and it lands for them. And you're making some kind of change in their life through the simple learnings and teachings and words that you have your own self, right? That you've learned for yourself. So that's kind of how I started in the podcast industry. And then I worked in corporate, I worked in marketing and all kinds of jobs for the last 10 years in the corporate world, marketing, PR, all that kind of stuff. And I in when the world shut down, I lost my job. And then I was like, you know what? Let me see if this business has any legs. Like, let me see if this would go anywhere. So I started my podcast production agency in March of 2021 and launched my podcast launch services. They booked out in 72 hours, and then I've never stopped since. We've done so many cool things. We've done really cool launches. We do podcast management, and we do like strategy and tech and like all of the above. So it's been really fun. It's been a really cool journey. So that's a little bit about me. I also have a dog. His name is Gus, and I absolutely love him. So yeah.
What breed of dog is that?
What breed of dog is he?
Yeah.
He's a cockapoo.
Oh, cockapoo. I think mine is similar. Mine's a Lhasa Duke.
Oh my God, that is so cute. I just love them. They bring so much joy into,
Yeah, and they're so
you know,
innocent and everything.
exactly. They're so innocent. I don't know. They're so cute. I love it so much. And when people ask me like, oh, tell me about you, I always have to throw him in there because, I'm a big animal person, I don't know, just, yeah, it's a feel good thing,
Yeah, it is. It is. So I think our journey is actually different. The same,
Mm,
basically the same, because I started podcasting in 2022, if I remember correctly. And it was at the point where I too was transitioning from being, I think on my LinkedIn, I have serial entrepreneur there. So I was transitioning from that to actually
yeah,
focusing on one thing, which is this thing. And
that's amazing.
podcasting too, yeah, was part of my journey. I always talk about that journey of getting comfortable with things I previously thought were uncomfortable, like working out, going to the gym,
Yeah.
like talking to strangers online. Yeah, so that was part of my journey. So I think that makes our stories a bit similar. So when you look
Love
at
that.
podcasting from the angle of a business, why do you think
Hmm.
having a podcast is valuable for a business?
So, okay, when you mean business, like do you mean like a corporation business or an entrepreneur or kind of both? It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, like an entrepreneur type of business.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I thought, and I just wanted to make sure. So the so in my opinion, having a podcast is a way that you can take your message and you can hit somebody else exactly where they need it with the message that they need the most, sometimes without them even realizing that they need to hear that message, right? So I think it's really important as a business, as an entrepreneur, as someone who's creating something to find that medium that allows you to share about your message, about your journey, about things that have impacted you, so that you can then go back and impact the people who need to hear that message. But further than that, what I think is so important about having a podcast for a business is in some ways it's kind of like I don't know if you feel this way, but in some ways it's kind of like a sort of like a non-negotiable in some ways. It's like you either have like that longer form of content, right? If you look at it from like a marketing point of view, this is one thing that I think entrepreneurs don't always get, especially right off the bat, is you need to have some sort of like marketing strategy for everything that you're doing, right?
Yeah.
And typically what you'll start with is like that longer form content, right? So you'll have either a blog or you'll have a podcast or you'll have a YouTube channel or whatever that looks like. And you have that main piece of content. And that main piece of content allows you to disseminate all kinds of content from there, right? What I love about having a podcast for that is the way in which it reaches the audience and the listener, right? It's a really cool platform to be able to have your target audience or your ideal client know who you are and start to develop a relationship with you, right? They build that connection with you. You hear someone's voice, you hear their words, you resonate with what they're saying. But then, more than that, if you decide to have a podcast and you turn it into a video podcast like this one, you see the person face to face, right? You're building a connection with the voice that you hear, the face that you see. And that stuff is really important for client retention. That is really important for new business. That is really important for establishing yourself as the go to person in your space, right? So I think having a podcast is a really cool way to get in front of your ideal listener, your ideal audience, your target audience, and really meet them exactly where they're at with, again, the message that they may not know that they need to hear. And also it's a free-ish way for you to market yourself, market your business, market your ideas, and it helps you become the thought leader in the topic that you are talking about. So there are a lot of benefits to having a podcast as a business owner, especially if you're out there trying to build your personal brand, right? Because we can talk about this more afterwards if you want to, but you have so many clips now for social media. You have different ways to take the content that you're sharing and use it in different mediums, right? You can use it in newsletters, online, quotes, blogs, like whatever it is that you want to do, you can do that with starting with a podcast. So it's very versatile in style. So I would say the effort to having a show is a lot. I mean, you have a podcast, you know exactly that it's how much work goes into it.
Yeah.
But the value that people get from that is kind of like you can't really put a price on that, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think I've actually shared a couple of episodes, and people reach out and they're like, "Oh, I never knew that," and "Oh, that was really
Yeah.
good." And apart from that, from the first point you mentioned, recently, I think that was about 2 weeks ago, I was talking with someone about one of our new products. So we scheduled a sales call about 4 days after we connected on this thing, and when we got on the sales call, it's like, oh, at the end of the call and everything, it's like, oh, I think I already know you because I watched a lot of your videos online before
Yes.
I to research about you and everything. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's actually a fringe benefit of having this.
It's so true. It is so true. It's so true because sometimes it's kind of funny because it's like people listen to your content and as the host, you don't necessarily know the people who are listening, right? But when they're listening to your content, they're developing a relationship with you. And it's really cool because then people get on a call with you. People are so excited to talk to you. People are so excited to, do business with you. People are so excited to learn
Yeah.
from you or hear your guest or whatever that may be. And like I just think that, you know, there's all kinds of platforms. There's all kinds of ways to market yourself. There's all kinds of ways to get your message across in the way that you want it. But I like to think about what's the path of like least resistance. What is the easiest way for people to be able to connect with you without you having to go and like reinvent the whole wheel? Because sometimes, you know, I don't know. I won't get into the whole marketing strategy because like that's like a rabbit hole in and of itself. But I really think there's a lot of value in bringing yourself to the mic and bringing your message to the mic and making your impact in that way.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing. So let's say a business has heard about what we've talked about so far, and they say,
Yep.
okay, I want to start a podcast. I know it was really difficult for me, even though I consider myself a techie person. So, so an average business owner wants to start a podcast. What are the first steps you would say they should take?
Okay, so one of the first things that I like to do, and I do this with all of my clients, is starting with their cheesy, but I don't know if you've heard, I'm sure you have, Simon Sinek's concept of start with why.
Yeah.
And okay, so I learned that concept years and years and years ago. And it really stuck with me because the reason why it did is because when you start with the why behind anything that you do, it becomes the anchor that allows you to continue on and continue creating, continue doing, continue being, continue existing, no matter no matter how difficult it gets, no matter how hard it gets, right? And I think that's really important because you need that piece, that's something within you that's going to anchor you back into what you're doing. So what I do is I always ask my clients to start with why is it that you are creating this podcast? Because if you don't have a strong enough why to create it, you're going to end up pod fading your show. You're going to end up doing 3 episodes and being like, well, you know what, that was a lot of work and I don't think I want to do that again. And I think I'm going to be done with this. And, you know, but you don't really get the benefits of having a podcast if you've only done 3 episodes, right? The connections that you make with people is like unbelievable, like you were saying at the beginning. And so, that's like the first thing. The second thing that I like to do is create like a mission statement for the podcast. And these are, I know these are not necessarily techie things, but these are things that will help you anchor back. And so when I say mission statement, in my mind, I think to myself, what is the podcast about? Who is it for? And why should they care? And those pieces are really, really, really important because then you're tapping into your ideal client in a really significant way because you're creating content for them and you're strategizing this podcast for them so that it hopefully lands a little bit deeper than it would if you didn't do that exercise, right? Then on top of that, now we have all of like the tech side, right? So you have the naming of your podcast, right? So you want to have a name for your podcast. And a lot of the times people will say, oh, you know, but what's the name of my podcast? I don't know what it should be. I would look to any programs that you already have, any books that you already have published, that kind of stuff. Those pieces will allow you to sort of name your podcast in a way that might be more personal and significant to you, but also tell your audience exactly what it is that the show is about. And then on top of that, now you have like more of the techie things, right? We have the intro, we have your outro, you have your trailer, and then you have your show description and those things as well. I can go into the tech if you want to.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, let's go into the tech. Let's talk about the
Okay.
tech.
so okay, so I don't know, Peter, when you started your podcast, what did you start with? Like what kind of technology did you have with your show?
Okay, so I think I still have it somewhere here. I had this $2 mic.
No way, that's pretty cool. No way, I've never seen something like that before. That's cool.
Yes, I had a $2 mic, but I realized that the sound was really noisy, so it needed a lot of editing because like the first few episodes were all audio, we're just audio only. So I think starting with that, I realized okay, I need a better mic. So I now got a different mic that's an Audio Technica. I think this dynamic Audio Technica.
Oh,
Yeah,
love that.
yeah, dynamic
That's
mic.
awesome.
Yeah, so that fixed the sound issue. Then I now went through a couple of cameras too once I started video. So
Yes, that'll definitely do it. I I'm similar to you. When I started my podcast, I started audio only and I used a Blue Yeti mic. And there's nothing wrong with a Blue Yeti mic, but you need to know how to like set up the Blue Yeti mic because if you don't know how to set it up, then it sounds like you're like in a tin can, like swimming underwater. Like it doesn't sound very good. Probably similar to the microphone that you had over
Yeah.
there, your first microphone. So when it comes to the rest of the tech, really what you need at the end of the day is a microphone, you need a camera, and you need a way to record, right? So some kind of recording software. So people make it way more complicated than it actually needs to be. Myself personally, I travel a lot, and so I have this Shure mic that I'm using right now. And then I just bought this like little, I'm going to show you. I bought this like little stand for it off Amazon for like $10. Look at it.
Oh.
It's so easy, okay? And it makes it so much easier to be able to create content, to be able to do a podcast. I also do voiceover work, so it makes it really easy to be able to do those things because I don't have the whole arm and like I don't need the whole setup, right? So you have to think about where are you going to be podcasting? How do you make it the easiest possible way for you? And what type of equipment do you have? Like, what does your budget look like for all of that equipment, right? So I have this microphone that I upgraded from the Blue Yeti years ago. I also recommend always a pair of headphones because you don't want that feedback into the different mics. You don't want that like noise between the two hosts or the two,
Yeah.
guest and host or whatever that looks like. And a way to record, right? So we're doing this through Zoom right now. That's easy. And we're also, I mean, I have a Logi Stream camera that I use, especially when I'm traveling. I have a DSLR camera that I use when I'm at home, but we don't necessarily need all of that all the time, right? I think we can easily get caught up in like, oh my gosh, everyone else's podcast looks a certain way, and mine has to look a certain way too if I'm going to get started. But it doesn't necessarily, because at the end of the day, like you could have something that looks so cool. You can have like the coolest set, the craziest background. But if the content that you're sharing isn't good, people aren't going to listen. People aren't going to watch. It doesn't matter how good it looks, you know?
Yeah. 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 So talking about the content not being good, you talked earlier about starting with why, then creating the
Yeah.
mission statements, then choosing a name for your podcast. So how do you choose a name that would attract the people you want to listen to that podcast?
Absolutely. So kind of like what I was saying before, making sure that whatever it is that you're creating kind of aligns with everything else that you have going on. So if you're a business and you have a signature program, or if you have a signature book, or if you have a signature framework or something like that, looking to there first and pulling from there first, because if you've already written about it, odds are there might not be a podcast about it, and odds are that you've done some research to make sure that that title lands with your audience, right? Same thing for a course or a program or anything like that. So I always start there of like, what is the program that you have? What is the book that you have? What is the service that you offer? Even what is your company name? Stuff like that, starting there, but then also pairing that with the intention of the show and making sure that it actually makes sense for the listener. So, if you are a okay, I'll give you an example. One of my clients, her podcast is it's called Open Book, and she interviews authors. And so it kind of makes sense when you think about, oh, okay, open book, right? You like open the book, you open the story, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about ways that you can still be clever but still be specific enough that people actually understand the reference that you're making and what you're actually
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Okay. So so that's with naming. A lot of people make mistakes with naming, with everything you've spoken
How did you come
about.
up? How did you come up with the name for yours?
I can't even like I think it's my business is Target ICT. So what Target ICT does is basically helping businesses use tech to do more in their businesses. So I just
Mm,
played around that, just tech your business, made it short
love
and
that.
made it yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's good.
So
It's clever.
yeah, so for a lot of people have made mistakes in this with all these things you've talked about, with the naming, with the content, with the why especially, because like you
Yeah.
said, I know everything is difficult if you have no idea why you're doing it. If you're just doing it maybe
Right?
because you saw someone else doing a podcast and say, okay, I want to do one, so you might not last in that. So what are some common mistakes new podcasters, especially new business podcasters, what common mistakes have you seen them make?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, one of the biggest things is people don't know who they're talking to. And
Hmm.
when you don't know who you're talking to, especially if you're a business, it's a little bit different if you're an entertainment podcast, right? If you're more entertainment in style, you can kind of get away with not knowing 100% what that person, is like, what they're interested in, all of the above. it's no different having a business podcast. It's no different than having, a course or a program that you've created within your business, right? You still have a target audience, you have an ideal listener, you have a persona of someone who you want to reach and you want to impact, right? Especially if you want to sell something, right? So that's the biggest thing that I see. The other thing that I see is people don't necessarily allot themselves enough space or time to fully know how long the podcast production process is going to take them, right? And so people start a podcast and they're like, "Oh, this thing is going to be easy. I'm just going to sit down, I'm going to record, and then I'm going to have a show every single week." But then also with that comes your editing, comes your show notes, comes your content, right? Comes all of these different pieces. And so you have to put in your calendar the time to be able to do all of the work that is required in order for you to have your show, because then you risk pod fading. And then you've put all of this time, all of this energy, all of this money into getting something off the ground, right? But you don't have the time blocked in your calendar to actually do it or create it. That's where people like me come in, different producers and stuff like that, where we can come in and we can help and free up that time for you, which is awesome. But you know, people get frustrated because if you are going to go and create your show and you're not allocating X amount of dollars for the production of your show, and now you're frustrated because it's taking you so much time, it's kind of like, how do I find ways now to make it simpler? So there's that. And then the other thing I would say too is the content as well. Like, so making sure like you know what you're going to be talking about, whether it's with a guest or whether it's in a solo episode. Um, and then also doing your research, but how you title episodes. How you title episodes is really important because there's keywords, there's SEO involved in that, right? And if it's like, okay, I just did a strategy review for a client a couple weeks back, and the way they were titling their episodes was the guest name and the guest company, and that doesn't say anything to anyone. You know what I mean? So why is someone going to want to click on that? Because they have no idea what you're actually talking about in the episode. So um, make sure that you are titling your episodes properly in a way that people actually understand, like, what is it that I'm going to gain out of this conversation. So those are some things to start.
Hmm. That's interesting. That's interesting. I think for the schedule, I think you really got
Yeah.
that really right, because I remember when I started the podcast, I knew it was going to take a while. So I think that I recorded like four, was it 4 or 5? I can't remember at first, then release them
Yeah.
over like once a month, then reduce it to every 2 weeks, then reduce it to weekly. Then when I had a
Yeah.
lot of interviews, I now made it twice weekly, then got a producer at
That's
that
good.
point because I was it was turning to something else. Then once those excess interviews were out, that was I think around February or so, we went back to weekly. And so yes, scheduling time
That's
is
good.
really important, really important.
It really, really is, because especially like if you're not used to editing and if you don't know like how to do that, and if you don't know the tech behind what's like involved and what's required, like if you don't know those things, oh my gosh, you could spend like, I know some people, they're like, I spent 6 hours editing my podcast. I'm like, 6 hours. Oh my God. The way in which I would outsource that so fast. Like if it was taking me 6 hours to do something, not a chance. I would never. I would like honestly never roll it in as a business expense and call it a day.
Yeah, really true. So there's one question a lot of people who do podcasting ask, and I'm going to ask that to you too. So when you're starting a business podcast, which type of episode is more important, solo episodes or guest episodes?
That is a really good question. Okay. I have this conversation with one client in particular often, because her audience really likes when they hear from her. Like they
Hmm.
really like when she shares her own expertise, but she doesn't like doing solo episodes as much. So what we've kind of done was figure out how to do like a hybrid of that within her guest podcast episodes. So I think that it comes down to, what is the type of content that you are most comfortable in creating? Of course, push yourself a little bit, like do some solo episodes if you feel like doing them. Um, but I think that they're both important. And I think they're important for different reasons. I think solo episodes are where you can really drive down your message and like drive down, your specific area of expertise so that you can target like in that message. But it's also really good to have those guest episodes if you want to, because you can hear different perspectives, right? And you can hear different things. I know on my one podcast, it's called As It Relates to Podcasting. I did for the first like 10 months of having that show. I always did guest interviews. Every single month, I had a guest on every single episode. Then I started doing solo episodes. Well, those solo episodes started performing way better than the guest episodes. And I was like, oh my God, like it was like doubling my downloads. And I was like, oh my goodness. So then I actually just paused the whole podcast. I just put it on hiatus like a couple weeks ago to relaunch it in September. And I'm going to relaunch it as a solo podcast with some guest episodes. So I think it's like about trial and error too. Like you have to start so that you can at least see the data and start to see the numbers and see what people are engaging in. And then from there, you can make a content shift. Like we look at podcasts every 3 months, and we look at the strategy every 3 months, so that we can determine like, is this strategy working? Do we need to shift something? What kind of content or episodes do people like to hear the most? What kind of topics resonate with people more than others? And then how do we create more content like that to fit what the audience is looking for? So I say start, but start with the content that you want to, like, you are most comfortable creating right off the bat. And if you're going to do solo episodes, make sure that they're tangible, make sure that there's a takeaway, make sure that there's like something. I like to work off like 3 points or 5 points, like that type of framework. Like you're going to hit on these 5 points or you're going to hit on these 3 points. And the reason why I like doing that is because it's tangible for people. People can take things away and people can implement them right away. And I think that's why my solo episodes do better than the guest episodes, because there's clear call to actions in those episodes. So each of them serve a purpose. You just have to figure out what the right balance is for you too.
Yeah, I actually agree with you on that because I did a lot of guest episodes, like I said, up to February. But I
Yeah.
realized when I started doing the solo, I started alternating guest solo, guest solo. I realized the solo episodes were getting more interaction, more reactions, more views than the guest episode. But it seems that they're just a whole lot of work to get a solo episode it's
Yeah.
good.
Exactly. And then that kind of too comes in with like the I know for my own self, like I overthink the solo episodes quite a bit because I'm like, oh my gosh, what if they're not long enough? What if I didn't share enough? What if I didn't, give enough? But then I always have to remind myself, like, a lot of the times people, especially when they're listening to learn from you, they don't have the same expertise as you, right? So even you just sharing a tiny little bit is they learn more than they have, first of all, like in the before they landed on your episode. But it doesn't always have to be this really long thing. Sometimes the most powerful episodes could be like 8 minutes long, you know?
Yeah.
I've just found that with the solo episodes, that sometimes when I do the shorter ones that are specific and answering questions that I hear all the time, those are the ones that do better because those are the questions that people have.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so another question I see. Some people ask, who has to be the face of the podcasts? What if the
Ooh.
maybe business owner isn't photogenic or isn't comfortable in front of the camera or just doesn't want to do a podcast? So who does he have to be, business owner, or does he have to be someone else? Can he be someone
That's
else in the
a
business?
That's a really, really good question. Yeah, I think it can totally be someone else in the business. I think that, if that's the way you develop your strategy and that's the way that, you have like that one person who might be more forward facing, might be more the person who is, I don't know, like gonna be the face of the outward marketing kind of stuff. Yeah, totally. I think that, I know people who don't, people hired a different host for their show that's not even them. Honestly, like I feel like anything goes. But I also think too, like you want to make sure that you're staying like in integrity with like the show. I think that's really important. But if you want to have a podcast, um, I think it's important to know like what type of podcast is it as well, right? So let me go back. Let me go back for a second, because if you have, if you know what type of podcast that you're creating, and let's say, oh my goodness, sorry, I'm having like crazy allergies today. I'm really sorry.
That's okay.
If you know the type of podcast that you are wanting to create. And let's say part of that podcast strategy is for you to have different co hosts on the show, then that is just the expectation that you are setting for your listener. So it doesn't become confusing for them. They know exactly what to expect right off the bat. Where it becomes confusing is when you start changing things all the time, like back and forth. So if you want, like I have another client, she has like a guest co-host. So the guest co-host will come in, once, every 4 or 5 episodes, and she'll come and do a couple of episodes with the host. and then she'll take a little bit of a break for a few weeks and then call it a day, right? So that kind of stuff, it goes just as long as you set up what that expectation is right off the bat, so that your listener doesn't get confused and they're not like, who is this person? What is this show? What am I listening to? Why am I listening to it? And all of the above. So,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, another question we people have starting out with podcasting is how often should they publish episodes? Some people say you publish daily, so you're out more often. Some people say twice a week. Some people say weekly, which I agree with.
yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you too. I think weekly honestly is like the sweet spot. Some people will do bi-weekly and that's fine too. And I've had people do monthly. And at that point, I feel like monthly isn't really like, it's fine, I guess, but it's not a lot of content, right? In the sea of content and how much content is being created, one episode once a month is really just not a lot. So I say weekly. But I also, you have to make sure that that publishing schedule actually works for you. But then further than that is the marketing of those episodes. So you can put out weekly content, but if you're not doing any type of marketing behind those episodes, that content isn't going to go very far. There's only so much, like, you want to make sure that your show notes are good. You want to make sure that your titles are good. You want to make sure that you have the SEO behind the episode as well. But that kind of, it's not that it only takes you so far, but like it kind of only takes you so far. People still need to hear about it, right? You still need to use the different marketing channels in your business to make sure that people know about it, like your newsletter, for example, or your social media, for example, or if you speak at events, right? How do you spread the word about your shows? How do you spread the word about your anything that you're doing, right? So I would say weekly. And also, if that doesn't work for you, re-strategize. It's kind of hard because it's like I don't want to tell people to like go burn yourself out and do it weekly just because you have to do it weekly. Like you don't
Yeah.
have to do anything, but I think like the more consistent you are, like the consistency behind it is the thing that's most important, right? So the more consistent you are, the more you show up, the more you're willing to promote those episodes, the more stuff you're doing to bring attention to what you're creating. That's really important at the end of the day. Even if you're a bi-weekly podcast, you can accomplish that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. And I think one thing too that I have learned that has worked for me is, especially for guest episodes, most times I record in batches. So maybe like this current July, I'm recording about I think 16 episodes, or I think
Oh, good for you.
yeah, roughly 16.
Wow.
So those will be scheduled going forward. So I'm not under pressure. Yeah, for yeah.
Exactly. I'm the same way. I'm the same way. When I'm doing recording, I'll do like, in one month I'll do like, I don't know, 10, another
Yeah.
month I'll do another 10. And then I'm like, okay, let me just like take a little bit of a break for a couple of months. Or if there's like a really cool interview that kind of comes across my desk, then I'm like, okay, like let's do that interview as well. But I agree with you. I like being ahead. I like to have the content done in advance. The more you can record in advance, the more you can edit in advance. And then it kind of takes the pressure off the whole production process in and of itself. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you talked about marketing the episodes being important. You talked about things like the title, having some SEO behind it, sharing it through marketing channels and all that. So let's say a business owner has started a podcast, and they want to get more of their target audience listening to that
Yeah.
podcast. So
Yeah.
what's the best strategy, let's say, to do that?
Okay, that's a good question. So, first of all, you need to figure out where your audience lives. Are they on Instagram? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on TikTok? Are they on Facebook? Do you have a Facebook group, newsletter, blog? Like, how are they coming into your world? How are they coming in and consuming your content? That is really, really important to know where that's coming from. And then from there, what I like to do is craft a specific strategy, right? What is all the content that you're putting out there? And how does the podcast fit or support all the other marketing strategies that you have going on within your business? How does that work, right? So, for example, if you have one podcast episode, how do you pull out the right amount of content for you? So that could be video clips, it could be quotes, it could be stories, it could be all of the above. It could be carousel posts, it can be a blog, it can be a newsletter. How do you take that one episode and then how do you create the content that you want to create from it. You can create a lot of content from one podcast episode. So it's all about really at the end of the day, just taking a look at like what is your own existing marketing strategy and then how does that fit into it.
Interesting. I think that's those are some good points. Good points on the
Thank you.
on marketing on marketing the podcast.
It's challenging though too, because it's like it's not a one size fits all, right? What works for me might not work for you. What works for you might not work for me, right? And we have different channels, we have different audiences. Our audiences live in different places. And so there's like best practices, of course, which is all the things I just listed, but you don't really know until you actually start marketing it. What I will say is like make sure that you're following and trying to get above what are those different trends, right? What is trending right now in the industry for you to, and how do you leverage that for you to be able to, promote your show? So for example, if short form video is something that's doing really well right now, how do you take your podcast clips and how do you create those in order to have your content front and center as well, right? But then further than that, how many clips do you want to create? Do you want to be putting out 3 clips a day, or do you want to be putting out 3 clips a week? It has to work for you, your marketing strategy, your marketing goals, and your business goals as well, right? So it's not one size fits all, but there are definitely best practices to implement when it comes to that.
That's great. All right. For podcasters who decide to have guests on their podcast like this,
Yes.
can you share some tips for finding and inviting relevant guests for the podcasts?
So okay, first of all, take a look at your network, right? Because your network will be really powerful. And then further than that, I really like different Facebook groups. I think that is a really it's a good way to get guests. It's a good way to meet new people. It's actually how you and I met as well, which is really cool. And our paths probably never would have crossed if it wasn't for that, right? Or maybe they would have, who knows, right? And then so you have your network, you have different, Facebook groups, social media groups. There's also online services where you can go and like put yourself on there to like be a guest or to find a guest. But then also too, one thing that I like to do is I like to take a look at social media. I like to take a look at social media, search for the keywords that I'm looking for, the type of guests that I want to have. And I actually compile, like, I kind of, maybe it's a little bit like old school, I guess, but I compile a list of people that I want to pitch and I'll pitch them and I'll say, hey, I think you'd be a really great guest for my podcast or a client podcast or whatever that looks like. Would love to have you on the show. We secure guests in like the hundreds of thousands of followers, like 500,000 followers, 600,000 followers, just by doing that, right? And so it's kind of like you have to be courageous enough to put yourself out there, and also just know that like the worst thing that someone can say is no, right? And so we kind of do a mix of all of the things, right? Taking a look at friends, networks, call outs on social media. Hey, do you know someone who would be a good guest for this? Facebook groups, other social media platforms, and then curating your own list as well. So really like the options are endless. It can feel a little bit hard to find guests sometimes, but really just tap into like what are the topics that you want to talk about? What are the things that you want to cover? And how do you take that and ultimately, find the people that are the best fit for that type of conversation?
All right. So I think let's go to the next the next session talking about using AI in podcasting, because we've heard, I think for the past 1 year, almost 2 years, I think AI has been everywhere, has been doing everything, creating videos, doing this, doing that, doing this, and it's like the whole world is just AI everything. So so how is AI being used in podcasting?
Okay, so everyone uses it differently. I'll tell you how I use it. So I use it so I record a podcast episode, or I have a client that records a podcast episode. I edit all of the content in Descript. That's my platform of choice. That's the platform that I like to record on. Sorry, not record on. That is the software that I like to edit on. But within Descript, they have a lot of different AI features as well. So I put the episode in there, and then I can instantly remove all of the ums right off the bat, right? Like with a click of a button, I can remove every single in the whole conversation. That has saved me so much time. As you go through, you still have to listen to the podcast episode. And this is where some people will differ with AI. Some people will just do, straight AI for everything, and they don't do anything manual. And I actually kind of disagree. with that, I think that you need to have a human touch on it in some capacity, because you can edit your content. But if you're not listening to it back and you don't know what it sounds like, it could be really choppy. It could sound really bad. So, like, using AI to help edit is good. And also, because it can save you time. And also, you want to make sure that you are checking it and double checking it, because, at the end of the day, you have to quality control your content, right? So there's that piece. I also use it to help me with show notes, helping come up with different titles, and then helping to find social media content, right? So within the podcast episode, I can help it, like using Descript. Um, it can help me find clips that are relevant, quotes that are relevant, and that kind of stuff. So I love using it for that. And then in addition to that, there's like external tools, right? There's tools like Minvo, Opus Clips, and that kind of stuff that can help you create the content as well. There are so many different AI tools. I have found that using something like Claude AI, which I think is only available in the US, but I'm not 100% sure. I live in Canada and I know it's not available in Canada, but when I'm in the US, I can use it. ChatGPT is also really powerful. And then my editing software, Descript, is the exact, it pulls off of ChatGPT as well. So I think that it's like, don't get too caught up in all of the different AI tools. You have to find the tools that work for you and the process that works for you. And I think that is like a really good way to use AI. But you also want to make sure that you're keeping it ethical, right? Like, I don't ask AI to create content off of something that isn't already existing, right? So I use AI to leverage and like help make the process easier, I guess, the production process easier, but I don't use it to, you know, like, I don't take AI ideas and pretend those are my own. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's like a little bit like a thing in between. So I don't know if that answers your question. Like, I feel like AI is like such a big, broad topic. You have to find the platforms that work for you, but don't get stuck down like the rabbit hole of like all of these new AI tools, because they might not all be helpful for you. And it might be actually it might make it a little bit more difficult for you to use it, because it gets overwhelming when you use all this different technology, right? If you don't have a purpose for it.
Yeah, I think my journey with AI for the podcast was a bit interesting. When we had audio episodes alone, I think after the first one
Yeah.
I did, I recorded myself and it was just annoying. It was just 10 minutes and I was annoyed having to record for it, because I did almost 4, 5, 6 takes of it. So the next episode, I used AI to read out the scripts, clone my voice,
Yeah.
read out the scripts. And I did 2 episodes like that. And it was horrible because I didn't get my accent. It sounded so robotic and just tiff,
Oh
tiff, tiff.
no.
The episodes are still online, but I was like, no, 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 I can't do this anymore. I don't even
No.
like
And
listening
like,
to it.
no. And that's the thing. Like, some people some people will use it to like, create their voice and create their face and like all that stuff. And that's where for me, I'm like, okay, we're drawing the line over here, because I think at the end of the day, like, the podcast should be driven by you. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just think that the show, I mean, and then this is where the nuances come in, right? Because people could say like, oh, but I feed it all the content, and it's just, it's just reenacting my voice. Like, I'm shy to be on camera, or I don't want to be on video or audio or this and that. But it's like, you know, you're at the end of the day though, like, if it's not you behind it, like, you're not building the relationships. You know what I mean? It's like a robot is building the relationships.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's where I'm kind of like, what? I don't know about that. I use it for like the content creation side, or like to help get ideas for solo episodes, or if I have a guest and I want, sometimes I'll throw in their bio. I'll say like, oh, give me some cool questions. I don't always use them all the time, actually pretty much never, but I like to see what it comes up with, right? I just like to see. So yeah, I don't know. There's like that fine line for me, I think.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
really saved a lot of time, because I tell people that if there was no AI, probably this podcast wouldn't have gotten past episode 3.
True. And look at you go now.
All right, so okay, you mentioned things like Claude. I use Claude a lot. I actually prefer it to
Mm,
ChatGPT. Yeah,
me
then
too. It's so much better.
yeah.
It's so much better. It sounds more human like. It
Human,
sounds more
yeah.
real. Yeah.
Yeah. ChatGPT sounds all stuck up and corporate and
Yeah, exactly. And it's like specific words and you're like, "Oh my gosh." Like,
yeah, so For podcasters who just want to get started with AI, you've mentioned some tools for them. You've mentioned some
Yeah.
things they should watch out for, like not going overboard, not making everything AI, just making it a collaboration between themselves and AI. So, do you have any tips for podcasters who want to start using AI, but they're not really sure how to begin?
Mm. Um, Well, I would figure out how is it that you want to use the AI. Do you want it to help you in your production process, or do you want it to help you in like the guest content creation process? Um, I guess like where in the process is it that you want to use the AI? I think that would be like the most important piece. Um, because then there's tools for all of those different things, right? So what I would say is like figure out the things that take you the most amount of time and the things that you don't love the most, and figure out how to use AI to help you with those
Hmm.
different things. So if editing is something that you don't like, which most podcasters don't like editing, I happen to love it, but that's okay. Most people don't. If you have your podcast episode, can you use AI like a tool like Descript, for example, to remove all of those ums right off the bat to make it so much easier for you to um, you know, for you to like to edit your content. If you don't like writing, how can it help you write? How can you take the transcript and, maybe use the transcript to help, write some blog post or a newsletter or something like that? How can you leverage different AI tools to help with the content creation process? So I would really figure out what is it that you don't want to do to start, and then start from there, but and then also just start testing and like playing around and like feeding it questions, whether you're using Claude, whether you're using ChatGPT. You can put different questions in there and it'll come up with different answers for you. So you could put in, hey, I'm having Peter on the podcast, this is what he talks about, what would be 5 really good questions to ask him? That's a simple way to use it. But also make sure that you are feeding it stuff that is coming from you. So yeah, I hope those tips are helpful, but I think it really just depends on like what path and where you want to use the AI. Look to the stuff that is like, I guess, the most bothersome for you, or the things that you don't love to do the most, and then go from there.
Okay, I think those are really good tips. So, one other question I think I forgot to ask earlier. For a business owner who wants to start a podcast, what budget should they be looking at?
What, sorry?
No, what budget should they be looking at?
Budget.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so oh my gosh, I know people who spend like no money on a podcast episode, and I know people who spend like $3,000 on an episode. Um, I think that really at the end of the day, you have to budget in like your equipment cost, all the tech, right? So your camera, your mic, your recording software, all of that. That could be, I would probably say maybe like $200, maybe $300. And then you also have, that's just a one-time cost though. And then you have your hosting platform, which can be anywhere from free if you're using Spotify for podcasters to $20, $30 a month. And so like on a monthly basis, I guess like, it depends as well. Like if you want someone to produce it for you, it could be anywhere from $100 an episode to $3,000 an episode. So it's kind of hard to say right off the bat, but if you're a brand new podcaster and you don't want to spend a lot of money, I would say go on Amazon, take a look. There's a microphone called Samsung 2QU, and that microphone comes in like a kit. You have your mic, you have your stand, like you have all of the things that you need. I think it's like $60 or $70 or something like that. So you can start for cheaper if you want to. But I think at the end of the day, it's just important to just start.
I think I agree with you. I agree with your advice too. It's just important to start because when I started, like I said, I started without video, so I just started with that mic I showed you,
Yeah.
and then there's this thing that they say that every solution brings a new problem. So from just that mic,
Yeah.
I got I got
It's
onto
so true.
buying so many mics, buying lights, buying
Yeah.
cameras, um paying a producer. I think sometimes I just look at the bill. I think when we did our, what do they call it, end of year reports, and I'm looking at the bill for podcasting, I'm like, how did I get here? By the end of the day, it's a business.
It's so funny. No, it's so true. But the other thing is too, though, people think that they have to start off right off the bat with the most expensive equipment. Like
Yeah.
if you don't have the money for that, don't do that. You know what I mean? Like if what I would say, if you're going to start by spending your money anywhere, I would say start on the microphone. People are
Yes.
not as forgiving as they used to be. People like to hear good audio quality. People want to hear it sound smooth and sound good, right? Whereas before, years ago, you could get away with having not great audio. But nowadays, that's not the same because there's so many creators, there's so much content. And like you have to make sure that your content is standing out right off the bat, because if you're not, then you lose that market share, right? So yeah.
Yeah, very true. All right. So for a business owner who is thinking about starting a podcast for their business, what's the biggest piece of advice you would give to them?
Ooh. I would say know that it's going to be more work than you anticipate, but it's also going to be more rewarding that you could ever imagine. The connections that you're going to make, the people that you're going to meet, the new business ideas that are going to come from that. There are so many things on the other side of podcasting that you don't even know are in your awareness yet, because you just have to start in order to be able to find those things. But Peter, when I first started my podcast, my first show, um, the first clients that I sold my launch package to were people that were past guests on my podcast. And I never anticipated running a podcast production agency. I never anticipated, having a business or being an entrepreneur. And if I didn't start my podcast back in 2018, I don't think I ever would be here. You know what I mean? I probably would still be
Yeah.
working in corporate. So you don't know the value of something until you start. So just start and know exactly why you're creating it. Yeah.
Yeah, really good advice. Really good.
Thank
So
you.
for listeners or watchers, if it's on YouTube, who want to learn more about you or who want to work with you or anything like that, what's the best way they can reach you?
Yeah. So my website is VOLT productions.co.co. It's not .com, it's .co. And my Instagram is at Simona with 2 underscores Costantini. I'm also on LinkedIn. And I have a production page as well, volt.productions on Instagram. So you can message me on any of those platforms. You can send me an email. It's hello@voltproductions.co. And yeah, we can chat from there. I also offer podcast production services, podcast management services. I have a membership for creators as well, and 2 podcasts. One is called Happiness Happens, and the other one is called As It Relates to Podcasting. So please check those out too.
All right. So for the listeners, Happiness Happens. Look for the podcast as it relates to podcasting. Look for the podcast and
Thank you.
Instagram, LinkedIn, Bold Productions. Everything will be on the show notes once this episode goes
Awesome.
out.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Simona, for coming on the show. So, for the listeners, did you get any value from this episode? If you did, please share with anybody who you know this episode will help. So maybe you know a business owner who wants to start a podcast, you know someone who has started and it's overwhelming, they're up to their neck in work and production, and share to them so that you can help them. And if you want to be the first person to know when we share more helpful content like this for your business, don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to us on or seeing us on right now. So thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you so much, Simona, for coming on the show. And till next week, when we come with a new episode, go through the old episodes, go through Simona's podcast episodes, and don't forget to keep taking your business. Bye for now.